Hello and welcome to the developer commentary for Assault Android Cactus. I'm Sanatan Mishra.
I'm Tim Dawson.
And I'm Jeff Van Dyke.
And we're going to be talking throughout the entire campaign about stuff that we find interesting.
So this is the first level, and we kind of put on an elevator to give you something interesting to look at, even though the gameplay is fairly simple at this point.
Yeah, it's really important to keep the first level accessible, so using a small space like the elevator lets us bring in enemies in really small numbers while not overwhelming you. And even still, a lot of players when they get here go, wow, why are there so many enemies straight away?
Oh, I've always really liked how the elevator accelerates there. It just adds this nice sense of pace.
Yeah, it's a good way of like adding movement and action to a level that's actually fairly static.
It can get very intense, especially when it crashes down at the end. That moment shocks a lot of people because it's the first truly dynamic element across the entire campaign. It's also, a lot of people don't even notice it because there's so much happening, but I like it. It's always been one of my favorite moments in the game.
It's got a nice action beat.
I think this is the first time people get to experience the dynamic music as well.
Yeah, so this is Turbine, and it's based on one of the earliest prototype levels, actually. One of the first layouts I built was this kind of round level with a couple of paths out of the main area. It was all based around trying to create choke points.
I think it had a giant fan at one point, didn't it?
Yeah, that's why it's still called Turbine, actually.
Yeah.
Even though the fan is now missing.
It plays a lot better at this scale, though. I think this is somewhere around half the size it originally was, which was just a little bit too overwhelming for people, and also you ended up being away from the enemies quite a bit.
I also like there's a caution sticker on the ground even though you can't fall off the edges.
Well, you have to be cautious. Don't give people that scare. I always enjoyed the aspect of this level the most where there's just so many enemies at some point that it becomes absurd, but it's still fairly easy to deal with. It was a really great moment for me because people would freak out when they saw it happen. They would get surrounded, they would get mauled, but then they defeat everything. It kind of works in line with the theme of the entire game, which is this sense of doing the impossible and overcoming ridiculous odds.
This is a level that has a nice sense of teaching you. So when you first play it, you're taught to get out of the middle of the level when all the enemies drop on you. But later you...
And here we have Filament, or my affectionately known level as They're Coming Out of the Walls! Which has no walls, but you get it.
So in the original earliest prototype of the game, you had a torch all the time. So wherever you faced, you were lighting up. Yeah, you're in the dark with a torch. And somewhere along the lines, I realized I kind of hated games that would set you in the dark with a torch. So the game became really brightly lit, and this level was left in as kind of a reference to the to that early version.
Well, I think we worked around it as well, that the enemies have their own lights and indicators that are lit up in the dark, so you always have all the visual information you need, whereas those games that are centered around characters having torchlight, especially twin-stick shooters, it's really common. They often have that problem where you don't have the visual information, and so the entire game is spent backing up and praying that, you get enemies in front of you. So we flipped it on its head a bit, and you still get the visually interesting lighting, but also the gameplay just works well.
Yeah, and switching between the lights on and off is really cool. I really like. So this is Capacitor. This was a kind of... I like this level because it's trying to tell a story. It's a story about a giant capacitor that's charging up. It's deep.
It is very deep. I, for one, was moved. It's also one of the first levels that demonstrates a drastic change of the play space and can make people really angry. Also make them really happy when they learn to deal with it. But at first, people are generally angry when the game does something difficult.
People don't like change.
People do not like change. People like to be angry, though. I, for one, like to be angry at games. By now, you should have tried out some of the characters as well. I usually have tried out a couple different characters by this point in the game, so hopefully people are checking them out and finding their favorite. I really didn't want people to roll into the first boss before they found something really comfortable. So that was a big priority of mine.
I think this is the first level where you really try to drop a lot of bombs on your head.
Yeah, there used to be more. Not anymore. You can all thank me for that, players. I vetoed the bombs. I always vetoed the bomb.
Embryo. I've always really liked this level, mostly because it's got our friend Dan as the voice of Embryo. He did such a fantastic job. The other thing is we also, I always think of the music of this level as being like, I don't know, like German techno or something like that. I'm not sure why I feel that's suitable. Might have something to do with Dan, I don't know.
It does have that very dark, kind of menacing feel to it, and it works great with his best robot voice impersonation.
Yeah.
I do like it too. And it's also one of the first times where we get to demonstrate that there's kind of a story that happens throughout the campaign. I thought Tim came up with some really clever ideas for that, with different characters having their own perspective and getting to drill down into something more than just the shoot everything gameplay.
It was really important to me that every character in the game felt like they were part of a spaceship and are working. They're not soldiers, they're kind of repurposed things. So Embryo runs.
Congratulations, by now you have defeated Embryo and are on to the second phase of the game, Hive. Well, this is kind of a cool moment because we get to introduce the first unlockable character in World 2, and not everyone's going to play them, but I think a lot of people are going to play Starch. We really tried to pick a fun character for the first unlock to encourage people to try and branch out, and I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, I think she's the micro missiles are just a really fun and visually spectacular weapon, and the character's a fan favorite as well. So a lot of people just react really well to Starch in general. They get the humor.
I love the music in World 2 as well. It's so different from the first world. It just, I hope it surprises people, and that's kind of across the entire campaign. I generally hope the game surprises people, but especially here.
I tried to make it so that as the level progressed, like the music really picks up in tempo, and also, I don't know, it's like from a mood point of view, the music initially has a real sort of happy tone to it, which not all of the music in the game is like that, but it just makes for a nice contrast.
I think it's interesting as well that across the campaign the levels get longer and the complexity of the music kind of increases to match, because each track needs to fill more space, so you get the first taste of that here, but it just continues across.
Art-wise, I really wanted to go somewhere different after the first world. Like I was almost doing the Reddy Brown loading bay to. So this is Influx, aka the level from the trailer that everyone remembers. Probably one of the most visually eye-catching moments in the game, I think.
In some ways I regret that it's so deep in the game. As I've learnt later in my life, people have very, very short attention spans, myself included. And this is already midway through World 2. But when people get here, they're genuinely like wowed a lot of the time, which is really lovely.
Especially like when the level transition happens and the blocks fall away and fall into place, and it just feels awesome when it happens, and it's really exciting.
Surprisingly, this was one of the first things I ever worked on from a programming perspective with Cactus, and it just actually worked. It played well, and that shocked me because I don't know how to do any of that stuff. It's very, very simple in the back end as well. It just maps a pixel grid to every block, and I can paint new versions of the level and kind of get it up and running very quickly, and that's why I was able to make all these interesting patterns and make them work so fast.
It's an interesting example of generating chaos and complexity out of a small number of parts. A lot of the look is based on animations being offset, so you get this beautiful ripple effect when the levels transform.
Oh yeah, I remember when you came.
So this is Oxygen. I actually really like this level. It's very simple. It's basically a donut, but there's a bunch of interesting dynamics you get out of it, and I liked what I was able to do with the lighting. Again, it's another level where there's a kind of story progression through from evening to morning.
Yeah, I remember when we learned that lesson actually. Before we worked on Cactus, we were working on little jam games and things, and one piece of feedback we always got with anything arcadey was that the sense of progression would feel lacking if there wasn't a visual element. You could push through and have harder enemies and more crazy things going on, but something like the aesthetic changing between different color grades of blue and red and green always gave people a much stronger feeling about the fact that something has changed, like they moved forward in the progress towards completion. I think this level works really well because of it, not in spite of its complexity, but kind of together with its lack of complexity.
Huge inspiration actually came from the old Brisbane airport. They had this kind of circular terminal with trees and stuff inside it, where you could see it from as you walked around it. And so it was like, it's something I drew on when I was trying to figure out how to visually depict this level.
I think this is one of the few levels in the game where I didn't go back and rebalance the bomb-only wave that you are so obsessed with in your level tuning.
Oh. I find this level a lot of fun to play. The way the moving tracks on the ground mess with your movement is fun and frustrating at the same time.
I always get amused when people play this level and they completely miss what it was inspired by. It was a very direct inspiration for me when I was designing it. We were playing a lot of Bomberman, and yeah, it's just, I think it's great. I like this level.
So the other visual inspiration, again, like the previous level, was airports, including the little flashing hazard lights at the top. Yeah.
It also is one of the craziest levels for bullet patterns yet. You get bullet hell with Embryo, but this is the first level where we dump multiple turrets plus a bunch of drones simultaneously, and it gets pretty crazy. I always appreciated that about it as well.
I really like the bits where the kegs start crawling out of the holes, because you often get like 4 kegs crawling out of a very small hole, and it really looks like they're just pouring out of somewhere.
What about the bits where the platforms start popping up and down, and you're trying to shoot a ball and you've got a perfect shot lined up and it's going to get you that full chain, get you that S+ ranking, and the platform pops up and blocks your shot? Do you love those moments? Because I can tell you from my experience on the internet, not everybody loves those moments.
Vespula, voiced by my wife, Angela, actually. And I thought she did a really good job. This level, you watch people play it and they struggle against it. And they think, wow, this is so much harder than Embryo. Just watching people try to deal with the waves of wasps, it's amazing, that it gets even harder than this.
I really like the fact that people are just never sure that what the game is going to throw at them, and I think this boss does a perfect job of that. You're saying, yeah, she's super hard compared to Embryo, and that's kind of wonderful. You think the game is going to be all bullet hell, and it's going to be kind of Embryo-like, and you just have to learn the patterns, and then you have this, and it's, oh, there's 100 wasps on screen, and they're circling around, and they're moving out to get you. And also, yeah, Ange does a fantastic job with the voice. She's appropriately kind of menacing, but not evil, and just really, really good.
It has that kind of melodramatic announcement to things as well. She did a really good job. I think I'm still most proud of the way Vespula turns into a ball. That was a idea I had, and I had no idea if it was going to work, but I was too scared to tell anyone how unconfident I was until I modeled it. Yeah, it ended up working really nicely.
It works super well, except when people try and shoot the ball.
Yeah.
The behavior of the wasps is sort of mesmerizing in a way.
Checkpoint. The best idea I never had. This is such a cool level.
Yeah, so this was a really important switch up, I think. We got to the point of the game where it felt really important to show a different type of gameplay and something that they'd never seen before.
And the moving through the ship now, is was such a huge step. Seemingly simple, but
Yeah,
you know,
it's
and-
conceptually just another arena, but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's located.
The arena is moving around the player, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's cool.
Always had trouble with understanding how this level would work before we actually built it, because if you're moving through the level, then how do we encourage you to defeat the enemies? How do we box you in? How do we get the battery going well? But it just works so well. It's so much fun. I think if the whole game was like this, it would feel tiring and just not very interesting, but as a one-off or a two-off across the campaign, it's brilliant.
yeah, it's one I'm pretty sure that the seams would show if you try to do it too much. But as a palette refresher, it works really well.
Always liked how you made the wall lights react to the music.
Yeah. Some people don't realize, but they're literally bouncing off Jeff's music. It's not like pre-canned or anything like that.
It's like a frequency analysis or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although if you turn off the music, it does do some random
I just have to sample Perlin noise because I no longer have an audio stream to work off.
Yes. Automation, what a great track. It's just
So this is Transit, set on a moving train, which is just like Descent. It's the second time we had a small gameplay space set against a moving background, but I was particularly proud of this level. There's a lot of detail going into the track work and the train itself.
I always thought the turns were the interesting part for this level. The train itself and the track work is pretty cool, but the way that it interacts and confuses you and tricks you, and I know this is a common theme with a lot of my comments across the commentary now, but surprising people is always good. And this level surprises a lot of people when it twists and it turns and they get pushed around.
The way the perspective changes with the camera rotating and stuff.
Yeah, like I love that first turn. It feels like it's just being interesting, but it's actually setting up the laser sweeping in. It's a very functional kind of setup.
I really hope people have figured out how to weapon swap dodge by now, because a lot of people don't figure that out by now, and then the laser comes and they don't know what to do. And even though there's two solutions, you can weapon swap dodge through it, or you can stand behind an enemy and let them tank the laser. A lot of people just don't figure out either of those, and I'm a bit sorry for that I don't convey things better, but I think when you do know or figure out those strategies, it's one of the most interesting and fun parts of any level across the game.
You can also stand behind the crates, but then we remove the crate that you're standing closest to. That's where the next enemy spawns out of, which I always liked because it's got that sense of at the start you can just stand behind any crate, but by the end there's only one crate left.
What's in the crate? What's in the crate? Which you'll find out shortly, I'm sure.
I didn't know that. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm not going to change the way I play now.
Yeah, you can actually do it strategically by standing next to a crate that you're most okay about losing.
You can tell that Tim was the primary idea man behind this level, because again, it's got multiple waves with just bombs.
Bombs are great. Everyone loves bombs. I put the bomb tanks in as a joke, but nobody stopped me, so they made it into the full game.
Bomb tanks are great. You won't see those for several levels. So here's a level that not a lot of people are going to talk about loving because it's kind of evil. Heat. I'm super proud of this level though, despite people hating it. They hate it for all the right reasons. That's because it's mean. It's mean.
Well, you put all this stuff in there that looks like, oh, that's a little safe spot. Oh, no, it isn't. And oh, this is safe in here. No, it's not safe.
Well, yeah, it teaches an important lesson. There is no safe spots.
No, there is no safety, but
This is an unsafe game.
It's much safer than it ever was in the early stages. I remember the first version of this level where we didn't have this open middle section. Like, there was a pathway, but it was closed off at the edges, and it was almost impossible to escape death when the fire was coming for you. But now with the open section, it's good. And we also do a lot of changes now as well, with the fire turning off, moving fast, moving slow, double fire, all that kind of good stuff.
I feel like the thing nobody notices in this level is all my pixel art on the walls. It has I do little fire animations, but the animations tell you what's going on. So when the fire's regular side up, it's telling you it's coming out one of the burners, and when the fire goes upside down, it's coming out the other burner. And when the fire gets really huge, it's coming out both burners. And then during the point where it stops, you get cooling written on the wall. So it's kind of it's helping you out, but nobody notices.
No, that yeah. I noticed eventually, even though I worked on the game. But you know, other people probably notice more than me.
An early version of the game, when it does a quick spin around at one point, and with bombs dropping, and an early version actually kept spinning around fast until all of the bombs were gone, which meant if. So this is Revolution. This was another level that was prototyped very early on. This is kind of the first idea for a moving level that would have parts that would rotate around itself. And it's kind of, I've always thought of it as a really visually interesting level. It's so much is going on.
It's got more pixel art that people probably won't notice. Lots of it. Where you've got the arrows on the side that show you which direction they're going. I think they changed speed as well, right?
Yeah,
Based on the
they've got a bunch
speed.
of, they scroll and animate between different states.
If only this game wasn't moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, people might notice these things. But I think it looks cool. This is one of my favorite levels for the fact that it has so many lasers. Any level with a lot of lasers is just awesome in my book.
Yeah, I really like the way the laser plays with the rotating blockers, so you get this kind of strange lasers shooting out at odd angles gameplay.
How many people do you think actually ride the circle around as I sort of intended when I was designing some of this gameplay?
It's kind of hard. Like I feel like sometimes it feels like your friend, but a lot of the times it just feels like a frustration, which is a shame because it would be nice if it was more practical. I think.
Yeah, I remember in the early prototypes, the blockers on the end were full length of the rotational area, so you couldn't walk past them, and it made the spinning a lot more of your enemy than your friend. Now you can kind of use it. I use it personally. I use the accelerate and I spin around with it and avoid all of the things that can hurt me. But yeah, I think it's a bit 50-50 in terms of how people view the spinning.
The accelerate actually reduces the damage you take, doesn't it?
Yeah, the accelerate will give you a sort of evasion on damaged input because you're moving so fast that
you can easily collect bullets, right?
Yeah. So to compensate, it actually like ignores every third point of damage.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
it's a fairly essential power-up if you're trying to play recklessly, and also early on if you're trying to collect all the pickups to get a higher weapon level, since it will suck in everything.
Yeah.
Right, so this is Justice. I really like this level. This boss is voiced by Tim, if I remember.
Yep.
And that was a lot of fun to do. Music-wise, it was like a circus or something, or I don't know. Definitely, I was thinking deranged robot. and I always liked the way the fence post mechanics worked, and that you could you could take them out, and it was to your advantage to take them out. But and if you got distracted by everything else, then and you didn't take care of the fence posts, you just end up in this hell grid.
I think this was the most nerfed boss throughout development.
He's a tricky one. He deliberately has this kind of three-phase structure, and his first phase is very defensive, which I think just made him like an unreachable wall for a lot of players.
In some ways, I'd actually describe this boss. Alright, we're moved into World 4, and the game is getting pretty deep by now. You've unlocked a bunch of characters. I really, really hope people play the different characters. I think that they do, based on anecdotal evidence of watching them play and leaderboards and things, but I really hope they try Shiitake anyway, because she's so much fun. This level was... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, those mines are just really fun to play with, and laying them in the right spot and having the enemy walk into them just feels really, really good.
Yeah, she's probably one of the most tactile characters to play. As that sensation of every shot just feels so strong.
Yeah, especially when you line up a whole whack of robots all in a row.
I really like this level. It's one of the larger levels, and it feels like it's almost one of the most representational levels in the game, where you get a big mix of enemy types, a lot going on, the level's constantly shifting, but you kind of can really cut loose.
It also has a very simple concept that ends up in a lot of complex situations, which is a hallmark of the better levels in the game for me. So the platforms that are shifting out are just kind of ones that aren't near you, so they're not going to cause them much. They have no enemies, you're not on them, that kind of thing. So you can actually control which platforms drop away and which ones fall in if you're paying a really, really close attention. But by having this simple nature of how they react like that, and then having a lot of variance in the type of platforms that can change, I find that it creates enough chaos that it's really exciting all the time. So I like that about it too.
I find World 4, which is set outside the ship, is one of the most interesting, visually, probably the most ambitious worlds, I think, which is kind of cool. Like, it feels like you've worked up to this epic. You can see the ship in the background, you can see stars at times. It's a really nice feel compared to the, from going from inside to outside.
I know in the music I tried to really push the sci-fi sound of it, and thinking about being floating around in outer space. Certainly at the beginning part of the song just makes me think that.
I think the World 4 music is my favorite stage music, and second favorite track of the entire game behind Little Android, which just makes me crack up every time I hear it. Whenever you watch anybody play the game, like somebody picked it up and.
So this is Relay, the second moving level in the game, alongside Checkpoint, and it's kind of cool. Like, I liked that we got to revisit the concept, and I liked that we got to revisit it in a different way. Checkpoint is enclosed and you're running through corridors, and this is like you're just floating in the middle of nowhere. You can see the panel snapping off behind you. It really feels like you're in a perilous situation. Even though mechanically it's pretty similar.
Yes, snapping off behind you, not at all the same as when the doors close. I can tell you, technically it's totally different. I promise. Believe me. But yeah, it works pretty well. I actually think this level's a good example of why this style of gameplay wouldn't work across the entire game, because by the end of the level it is starting to feel a little bit tired, but it's also refreshing and entertaining that it comes back and you get to do it again. So I really liked that. I thought it worked out well. And also because I did the design of this one, so obviously it's the best. That's how I qualify the different level qualities, by the way.
This is an interesting level. You're literally moving across the ship. You can see, depending on how far you move, you can see more or less of the spaceship, which was actually really hard to line up, because at times if you got it wrong, you'd end up half embedded in the ship.
I remember how much care and attention you put into the design of the different areas that you go through and the ship, and trying to keep the whole concept together, and then you get to World 4 and you actually get to see huge chunks of it in the background. And I think the sense of place helps. I certainly hope people get a sense that they're on a real place, and that as they travel through each level that they're progressing. So this was a really cool level because you get to move so far and you get to see so much.
Cactus in general is that, like, on the surface, it's a twin stick shooter and there's enemies and you shoot them. That's that. The levels have this cool look and stuff, but that if you look into it, there's a lot of depth and backstory, and everything from the level select to, like, this particular world and how we're outside of the ship. Everything is linked and everything ties into each other with the game design, the backstory, the level design, the characters.
Focus, the level that was originally meant to be giant panes of glass, but I think it's actually kind of cooler the way it is now. Landing down on these big discs that shatter away, and You fall down. You totally fall, by the way. None of this is faked, I can guarantee it. Just like I guaranteed everything about the other level. Trust me. I'm a doctor. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, I really like the layout of this level. Like, effectively, you're just moving from a smaller game space to a larger game space over time. But it has a lot of character and really benefits from being outside as well. You get to see you're getting close to the ship every time you fall down.
Yeah, you're moving down, you're crashing things out. It's got that real nice sense of progression that we're trying to do across the game. For me, I love the way the pillars are kind of moving down with you and creating this different play space. They're not there at first, and then you fall down and there, and then it crashes away and they fall with you. Getting that all to work properly and play well with the different enemy waves was a little bit challenging, but it works really well. And also, this level introduces more lasers. I don't know if you know this, but I love lasers.
Is this the level where you introduced Reapers, or were they?
This is the Reaper level. This is the level where I originally had 3 times as many Reapers, and then initial people that played the game got very angry with me. This is a theme, I feel like, at this point.
This level also has the blue toaster dogs with their little laser leash thing.
Yeah,
and,
the friendly ones.
Makes me very
The
angry.
only enemies in the game that can't actually hurt you, but people really, really hate them.
If you, I'm trying to remember if there's a way you can avoid their tractor beam.
You can run behind a pillar if you break line of sight.
Yeah, that's it. And and I've made them growl. It's really hard to hear the growling amongst all the chaos of the level. But yeah, they give you a little
Why would you
growl.
do that to them? They're trying their best.
Occasionally people can hear the evil, sinister laugh of the
that's
Reaper
great.
enemies
Of the
too.
Reaper, yeah.
I've talked to people who thought they were imagining it, and it was so good.
Yeah. I'm trying to keep it subtle, but yeah.
No, it worked so well.
So
Repeater. This is one of my kind of pet levels. It's very indulgent technically. It's reconstructing itself as you're playing with surprisingly little trickery. It's actually reassembling physics as you're moving around and trying to build a pathway between you and where the enemies are and everything else.
yeah, when Tim tells you something is really real, he means it, unlike me, so you can believe him.
Well, the whole game is smoke and mirrors. That's the whole point. Like, you know, good games make you feel like you're doing things that, you know, much more complicated things than you are.
But this level really is doing horribly complicated things.
Each of those blocks can transform both into tiles and also those wall blocks, which is kind of interesting. They kind of unfold and then spread apart and reveal little canvas inners.
Oh, it's so brutal.
Yeah, it was a horrible level to balance because, well, you can't.
I remember doing the audio for it was a bit of a head scratcher too, because each of those things trying to trigger sounds and stuff like that. Trying to do it in a way that's somehow supportive and intuitive, you know. But
Yeah, not sounding like someone dropping a bunch of kind of transformers down some stairs.
yeah, it was tricky. What's the logic behind what it's like the path that it's creating?
So it uses a whole bunch of things. The main one is it takes your position and your velocity, so it tries to put the blocks ahead of where you're trying to move.
Right.
So as you're running around, it's kind of trying to put the blocks where you're going, but also
Yeah, I've
keep a
noticed that
path
when
to the
I
enemies.
play it, it's like I feel like, oh, I want to go there, and if you push in that direction, it builds the floor in that direction.
Yeah, so it's kind of helping you out, but
Yeah.
also restricting you.
Yeah, because it puts those sort of box things in the way.
Sometimes it can end up being extremely brutal though if it decides that it wants to build a wall somewhere and you don't want the wall to be there. But
Yeah.
it's just going to build it anyway.
Yeah, especially
Yeah.
when you're trying to S+ this one.
It actually switches between.
Venom. So this is voiced by you, Nart, isn't it?
It is. It's my best impersonation of a super creepy giant spider robot that wants to destroy you.
We were contractually obligated to add a giant spider to the game because we're a video game.
And also Australian.
Yes.
I mean, He's a little bit small compared to the ones I see in my backyard, but he'll grow up. He'll get there. One of the few instances of true bullet hell in the game, I would describe him as. A lot of the earlier stuff, like Embryo and some of the levels even, are very soft, but Venom doesn't mess around. Every pattern, every wave is just brutal huge amounts of bullets on screen, hundreds. I think you can get it up to 1,000 in one of the waves, and it's just absurd.
Yeah, I really wanted to get. I really wanted to play with scale for Venom, and make him feel like the largest boss. Like, he's so large he can't even interact with you.
And, some of his phases too had to be nerfed quite hard, but also then had to be brought back and changed quite drastically. I learned a lot of lessons about bullet hell based on the first version of this boss that we spent a lot of time on, and I felt really bad because the concepts we were using were just not strong enough in the early versions. A lot of the bullet patterns were based on sheer number of bullets rather than kind of coalescing them together. And in the future revisions, like the version that people play now, he actually fires more bullets, I think, than the earlier unnerfed version, but they're all together and create.
So Centrifuge is our first intro until World 5, and I really like this level actually. It's kind of it's a meat grinder of a level, and it's just all about throwing huge amounts of enemies at you and making you deal with them.
It's always felt to me like the most sort of traditional wave-based level to me, you know? Like, because you can, I remember feeling like I could memorize the patterns, or I felt they were a little more predictable than some of the other levels.
It's also the first time the game is really that clean, traditional sci-fi in both the visual aesthetic and also the music for this world. I think is very much in that tone where the rest of the game's kind of more eclectic. Which I think is a fun change up that we take until now to go back to, yes, we can do the traditional style really well as well.
In general, each of the first levels of a world, we've tried to give you a level where you can cut loose a bit. So you go from Hive to Checkpoint to Assembly and to Centrifuge, and it's kind of it's a way to try out the new character.
This one's quite fun to play with Peanut, and when you first do that thing where you do the drill along the edge and just do circles. That's quite fun to do.
Was that a bug or was that intentional when it first went in? I can't remember.
It was technically like it was a implication of the rules that I realized, like, oh, if I say that if you can go along a wall, it'll correct your trajectory. That means you're going to be able to go around in circles, and then I increased the threshold to make it more viable.
Yeah, I recall that exact moment because it was awesome and we wanted it to happen more. But when it first happened, it was very shocking.
Yeah, and I remember like kind of sitting there going, is this going to break the game? And then we can kind of conclude it wasn't, so it was fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Peanut as well as, I think she's one of the most interesting characters in the game. I use this word a lot, interesting, but I think she's genuinely.
So Control, there's something I really like about this level. When I first tried it out, I found myself sort of becoming obsessed with using the little helper devices and trying to figure out the best sequence in which to use them and enable them. And every time I play it, I have my pattern that I go to. I don't think it actually is a very good thing in terms of score chasing or anything, but it's just it feels so empowering when you enable these things and you're able to cause a lot more damage when using them.
Yeah, they're super fun, especially activating the machine gun, which keeps going even after you leave. That is one of the most satisfying things across the entire game. It's just that moment where you step on it, you step off, and it's just shooting things for you.
Yeah, it's the only game, it's the only level where you get to use the stage hazards against your enemies.
They're all there just for you. They can't hurt you in any way. Unlike, Revolution, where the spinning can be a helper, but also a hindrance just as much.
Yeah, and I really like that it comes in so late in the game as well. Like, you know, you're heading to the home stretch, and it's just a way of mixing it up again.
You know, this was the only level that we actually put out in the game's beta, and had to remove and rebuild completely because I was so unhappy with the original design I had for it. But the redesign just works so well. I'm really, really glad we took the time to do that. The first design was a lot simpler. It didn't have these helper bots that would shoot for you. Instead, it had different layouts that you could trigger based on walking over switches. But essentially, you'd find a layout that worked best for your playstyle and your character, and then just stick to that the entire time. So my desire to give people options and create enemy waves that were better suited for using the different layout switches just never worked out. Whereas these helper bots, they're just great. They pop up, they shoot you, they do different things, so they all have unique purpose and useful. And as Jeff said, he has his style of how he uses them, and it might not be the most efficient, but it's like the way he wants to use them.
Convection's a really interesting level because I had to learn a bit more about how the level design or how the level functions, like from a technical point of view, and you learn how Nart and Tim put these levels together. Because I wanted the sound to trigger on when the flaming pads light up. And it was really interesting, as Nart mentioned earlier, with the pixel grid. Basically, you know, you used, if I remember, it was a good program to use, like a painting program or something like that, to change the color of a pixel would define what state a block was in, if I remember, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, you could paint in how long it was going to take for it to light up, how long it would stay lit up for, and all that kind of information.
Yeah, it was. I found the system really interesting, and then having to, you know, work that into the audio triggers, and then again, you know, trying to make it so that we didn't trigger too many sounds all at once, because obviously the machine and the level has the ability to just trigger hundreds of sounds at once, and just trying to make it sort of smart. And then the level itself is so incredibly tricky because of these flaming things chasing you, especially the ones where it lights up wherever you go. That one's especially hair-raising.
I'm really glad you took the time to handcraft the audio for all the fire throughout this level, though, because when we were thinking about automated systems, it could have sounded semi-correct, but the way it sounds when you play the level now, the fire races from left to right, it circles around you. There's that real sense of positional audio that comes through that just adds a ton to the feel of the level.
So all during development in Whitebox, this level had kind of giant red jello cubes that would come out of the ground to represent the fire. And in my mind, the level always looked like this. This was the thing, like whenever I was playing the Whitebox levels, they always looked like the final game to me. I was just filling in the art as I went. But I think there was some tangible disappointment when the jello cubes went away.
I love the jello cubes. I hand animated those jello cubes, and it took me about 30 seconds, and it was great.
It's interesting that there's a lot of the early access version of the game on YouTube and stuff, and you can watch, you know, how, you know, the way these levels used to be when we were developing the game, and how much of it has stayed true to the white box, and that it's, you know.
Collider. So this is one of the most divergent levels in the game, and I'm really proud of that part. We introduce another android that you're facing up against, but you don't even fight her to start with. It was a really nice way of kind of bringing things full circle.
This level is the bane of many people's existence. I don't think it's unfair to say most people would describe this as possibly the hardest level in the entire game, despite the fact that they might spend longer trying to defeat Medulla because she's just so brutal, and the level itself is so brutal.
I remember actively asking you guys to make it easier because I was finding it so frustrating to get through this level. I think especially when I was trying to S+ it, you know, because that is really, really tricky.
I feel like Licorice has some of the, well, like one of my favorite tracks in the game as well.
Yeah. It's because to me it's like it gets really, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, really video gamey there with the and I wanted the guitars to be as sort of the sound of her strength, her power, you know.
Yeah, it comes in really, really well in that semi-boss track style. It's actually a unique track as well because across the game we have whole tracks, boss tracks, which are progressive tracks, and the dynamic tracks, but Licorice is this kind of segmented whole track experience, so I really like that she has her own flavor, her own dynamics that go on there, and the track itself is just killer. It's, yeah, definitely one of my favorites.
I always had this goal of trying to make Licorice work as both a enemy and a playable character, and during development it was so scary. Like, we had contingency plans for if it didn't work out, but in my mind I knew how I wanted it to feel and what I wanted to capture with it.
Yeah, there were many risks associated with this semi-boss battle. The idea of essentially playing PvP against the AI and making it work, making it fun. Especially because we did a lot of early testing on actual PvP and it was terrible. So
yeah, not the best. Which is a
Medulla. Now, I suppose I had every opportunity to be the voice of Medulla as the audio guy on the team, but we decided to have my daughter Ella be the voice, and yeah, I thought she did a great job. We put a lot of processing on her voice, so she doesn't really sound like herself. But yeah, it was such a cool opportunity to revisit all the other bosses and re-say their lines, but she says the same dialogue that they did in her own voice. And so in a lot of ways that's showing that, you know, she's been in control of all the bosses. Medulla has been in charge of all the bosses all this time.
yeah, some really neat visual storytelling as well as the actual storytelling where we're finally getting to the conclusion and having all the big reveals about the game's plot. It's not the most complicated plot, but I think it really works to sell the location and the feel of the game.
It was really nice to kind of revisit both some new mechanics, also invent new mechanics with the dome levels, and also then revisit the bosses.
The music in this level is sort of like a montage of all of the previous boss battle music, with moments of, you know, unique Medulla music as well.
Yeah, it's a remix, just like the fight itself, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You're coming in and what's old is new again, and that was very important to us to get that feeling right. I think every classic game that you can think of from the kind of era that Cactus is obviously inspired by has this feeling, this emotion come through at the end that you need to revisit where you've been in order to move on to new and interesting experiences. It's so brutal. She's so... Oh, I just feel like when I get through some of these phases, when I get to the phase with the homing bullets firing at you, my heart rate increases. It doubles every time.
I was really proud of this boss fight for two reasons. Both how it contrasts with Venom, who's like being introduced as the physically largest boss, and then you go, well, how do you go larger than that? And Medulla encompasses the ship. Like, the entire stage is her body, but she's even bigger than this, and you're just seeing a fraction of it. And also how she contrasts with Licorice, where, you know, you've got an android who has all of your strengths, effectively. And then you go back to you get to finish on this big traditional bullets, you know, chaos, action everywhere.
it's really a celebration of everything in the game, not just the bosses that you've already defeated, but all of the mechanics and systems, the bullet hell, the swirling elements, lasers. It's a beautiful collage of all the cool things that you've enjoyed up until now in their most pure form in one fight.
Yeah, it was supposed to